another Friday, and that means another episode of Book and Tea, where we, your uncles and aunties of the neighborhood, sit down with our taste to chat about Commonwealth short stories, poems, and everything in between. Thank you for streaming us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, if you're watching on YouTube, or whatever you're listening in on. My name is Lisa Tay, your host for today. And here with us today, we have two very special guests. In fact, they are the correctors behind Jonathan Tell's award-winning short story, The Human Phonograph, which is about a woman who is reunited with her geologist husband at a remote nuclear base in Maoist China. So let us welcome Husband and Wife of The Human Phonograph by Jonathan Tell. Hello there to the both of
Well, hello. Pleasure to be here.
Indeed, what an honor to be on this podcast. I've heard so much about Book and Teh, and what an interesting name. Love the idea.
Thank you. Now, this week, the crew decided it's time for something fresh and different than the usual. So they gathered a couple of questions from Book and Teh's Instagram from our viewers, which, by the way, is at Book and Teh. And these questions are from our viewers, okay? And they are directed to the both of you as correctors of the story, all right?
Sounds fun. Let's go.
Alrighty, our first question for today is from user at somethingwongxx. Okay, so the first question is, what's the story really about anyway? Take it away.
Well, it is basically about how my husband left me for 7 years to serve, and then we practically reunited again. However, that wasn't fulfilling for me. We were busy with our jobs, me in the library and him with his expedition. I still felt empty, and long story short, I took care of him and stayed with him until his last breath.
Well, yes, I did leave you, but it was to serve the country. Well, you know the times back then. We didn't exactly have a choice, do we? And hey, we met again finally after Infantry 221. It was a long while, it was a long 7 years. So, but we still met each other in the end again. And I wasn't really trying to leave you hanging on my end.
Very well, there you have it. Okay, next question is from Milo Ice Tatna Ice, and he or she, couldn't tell for this one, asked, how did the both of you end up together? Didn't you read the story? Anyways, what's the juice?
Well, like in the story, it was 1961. I was a senior majoring in Russian, and this guy, who was obviously older than me, was completing his PhD in geology. And he basically tricked me into marrying him 1 year later. And that was before I knew we would be a part of 2,555 days.
I have no
This is
defense to that.
interesting one. And I believe the love was just as beautiful as it was painful for the both of you. And the next question is from Instagram user at Susu is da bomb. And here's what she wrote. Hi, I love the Human Phonograph so much. Thank you. Can't help but wonder how people back in the days communicated without WhatsApp and Instagram. And she added a shocked emoji at the end of the question.
Well, this must be a young reader. Well, we use letters, and unlike today, social media where you can see if someone reads your text and you get your replies within seconds, I had to wait days, and I usually wrote to him once a week. I remember the address being very vague as well because he wasn't allowed to disclose much about his secret mission, because government and all that policies, you know. So yeah, we just send letters to each other.
Well, I'll never forget about reading those letters. You know, I will usually just end up replying, talking about the weather and things like that, a bit of small talk here and there. But it was through letter, and there wasn't really much we could write to each other, honestly. Those letters we wrote to each other, most of them were actually being checked by the administration department before they were sent over to, well, my dear wife here. And just, it was to check for state secrets, and basically anything we spoke over, we written over in our letters, if there was anything been just a bit off, it would usually come back to us and we have to rewrite it. So what we could say to each other was very limited, and couple that with the long time we have to wait for letters to circle around, you can see why our emotion were particularly dry.
That is very strict, It's the first time I'm hearing it. And I agree with you on that. If I were to talk to my other half once a week, I think it would be very dry. So I, for one, have never actually experienced having to wait days for a letter to arrive. Must have been why people in the olden days never got bored, because they're always waiting for letters from someone. So beautiful in its own way.
Yeah.
Anyways, next question is from at I love curly fries. You all have very interesting usernames, and the question is, what's the bomb in the story?
Well, most of it is still under wraps, is what I want to say. But you can kind of guess from what over the years we have decided to tell others about the information released by government publicly talked about. But long story short, it is a state program during the time where we first split off from the West. When our government had a bitter split with Moscow, despite us being a communist bloc at the time, we decided to start our own nuclear program because we were very reliant on theirs to begin with, Russia's nuclear program, and thus began with the concept of the bomb is acronym, not acronym, but rather more of like a shorthand for most countries who had access to nuclear powers at the time, actually. But it was more than that. I would say at least that.
Okay, well, that was a little history class right there. So the next question is from at Trisha_Evans, and she wants to know, do you like your own characters? This is an interesting one.
Okay, so to me as a woman, I'm not keen on my character. I don't like my character because I felt emotional abuse by the surroundings, not only by the husband. For example, as a worker, when there's a guy hitting on me, the other women will leave me out. They will avoid me, and they don't want to talk a lot with me or catch up with me. And well, as a wife, when my husband was still alive, he never showed her love, and he even cheated on me. And yeah, as a citizen, I was nothing but my husband's wife, which should leave the place when he died, because I wasn't somebody, I wasn't anybody, and that was humiliating for me. Yeah, so yeah, I don't really like my own character.
Yeah.
I don't have much to say for myself. All I can say is I've only served the government and only the government. And over the time, yeah, I can appreciate myself as a character within a story because it is a realistic of how we handle ourselves at a time and what we worked with, dealt with the cards we have. But as a human being, I can't say I was the most exemplary example.
Okay. So as a woman, I'll have to agree with your wife, So, all right. Next is from Li Zijia. How was it like meeting each other after 7 years of living apart?
Well, it was awkward. I honestly, I don't know. I didn't know what to feel at the time. Time really has taken a toll to me, and I wasn't the same young geologist I was 7 years ago when that happened. But surprisingly, after seeing her after all these years, all I could say is that at the time when I first saw her again, those feelings never changed. Not ever since that day 7 years ago.
It definitely was awkward. We were being very polite to one another. He asked if I wanted some water. Well, I wasn't actually thirsty at the time, but I just said I was thirsty because, I'm trying to be polite. Yeah.
Well, must have been awkward. I would have been awkward around someone I had not met, even for 1 year now, let alone 7 years. And next question is actually from Mala Hot Pot. How was it like making love for the first time in 7 years? This is an interesting question, and he or she ended with a wink emoji. So take it away, people.
Okay. I mean, didn't you read the story? I was just putting on lipstick, which, by the way, it couldn't be found in Beijing for a long time. And he just started undressing me and touching me left, right, center, and back. Well, it was like a rainbow after the rain. And yeah, I have to admit that I was over the moon. Yeah,
No comment.
that's how much I can
Okay.
say. Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to play that because every single time there's a love, sort of scene in the story, my brain plays this on auto.
Nice one, nice one.
Careless whisper always works.
Yeah, it does. So indeed, next question is from Charmaine Chan. She asked, "What is the message in this story, though?" Mr. Husband, perhaps you would like to take this one.
Inherently, it's a love story. It's a story about two individuals split not just years but also boundaries apart, and finally they see each other again at the end of the world. Well, the nuclear test site wasn't particularly exaggerated to be called as the end of the world. And where this complexity lies between the gap between the two of us over the time, over the years, over the place, and as well as just how small the gap actually really was in reality, and we were just minding the gap ourselves mentally rather than pushing and just meeting each other straight down. Despite knowing how small the gap is, we kept each other at distance.
Yeah, to me, since I'm an emotional being, yeah, I like to say that this story also tells people about the devotion of a wife to the husband and their loyalty. And I want to remind all of you who listen to this podcast that women are not an object men can use anytime he wants.
Preach.
So please treat us humanly. Bring us to a romantic candlelight dinner, or as simple as whispering love affirmation each and every day. I think that's enough. So don't treat us like an object. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, agree. And we have a question from a very young reader, according to a username. It's 12-year-old Libby, who asked, to the wife of the story, what was it like working as a technical support at the library?
Wow. Interesting question. Well, thank you for the question. It was definitely exhilarating. You know, the library was like a heavenly stacks of books collection. I found journals, foreign books, documentations of Soviet installation. And what gives me an awe about that library is the classic literature. It's like a safe haven, but working there was a lot of men. There were a lot of men flirting with me, and that made other women over there uninterested to catch up with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and because of that, I'm also wondering why my husband wasn't that romantic to me, comparing to that men who are hitting on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there you have it. And question from I'm a Straight Fry to the husband this time. Cultural revolution was, a thing in China back then, a very real thing. So how did it feel not to be under the control of that?
Actually, we were. If you check the timeline, we are right in the middle of the Cultural Revolution, actually. So I think it would be good to brush up a little on world history a little bit sometimes, even for non-scholars, because they give a good perspective. And to answer your question, well, we were under the control of the Cultural Revolution. That's what kickstarted the entire nuclear program, and that's what pushed it to the degree where I was effectively a mandatory conscript to push for the program. And because of this, because of the split between us and the West at the time, this further accelerated to the point where we were pretty much the same as we were at wartime. But this is a new form of war, right? We are in Cold War. We are in the area where the Cold War was a thing, and as such, we push ourselves as if it's a wartime, but we are not really fighting a war here. Our war is with creating weapons.
Yeah. Interesting, very interesting. So we might want to have a podcast all about history one day, yeah. And next question is from at Sumaya Abdullah. What is the Operation Chillin?
That's classified is what I like to say, but we have declassified a lot of information over the years. And to summarize it, it was basically the early life testing of nuclear fission warheads in Qinghui, in a restricted and secluded part of Qinghui. And we were testing the effects and as well geological impacts of the nuclear program at a time. Based off what we have researched, we were testing them over and over and over again. And we were pushing it as far as high as we could because our country, China, China, we were way behind the race compared to the other two superpowers, the Soviets and the States. At the time, they were already far ahead.
Yeah.
And with how hard we were pushing it, that's how most of my colleagues, if not all of them, are already there at the time. And soon enough, I followed.
Yeah. Okay, next is from at Hot Chicky Lace. Woo. So why do you think the husband feels or felt not very married to his wife after they met?
Oh, I'm also wondering why. But I think it was because he thinks I'm a boring wife. We never enjoy that typical couple activities like listening to jazz or dancing in the ballroom together. But yeah, we were actually together but distant from each other. I assume that's why he felt that way. And he had a mistress.
Ooh,
It
defend yourself.
it has been 7 years, and honestly, I didn't know how to act. And we, to lack of better words, we didn't have time. I was constantly being pushed for projects after projects because I'm experiment after experiment because I'm the only one left alive that knew how things went. And working at these conditions, pushing myself, being at death's door every day, radioactive materials and thus invisible things. And at some point, I started losing it slowly but surely. And some part of me probably died inside just to cope with the situation, but I guess that's how it seemed to others.
Yeah. So coming down to our second last question from at Tina Gomez. Why did the husband not want his wife on his expedition? So why, Mr. Husband?
Well, for one, you know how dangerous this kind of things is. Back then, we didn't really know what radiation did, right? Far in the 1960s, 1950s, we didn't have much research on what it had on human bodies and human effects. So we pushed. We kept on pushing because we didn't know the risks. We weren't scared. We had people dropping like flies, but we ignored it. But the reality is, currently in the current modern day, we know just how dangerous nuclear and radioactive power is. And with that in mind, that's already a very valid reason. But the greater reason is that state security protocols at the time, because we are in a restricted village area, which we don't exist on the map. We don't exist. We are still being actively denied out on our existence to this day, actually. And if word leaked out, if she got involved too far, somebody's gonna get shot. And by somebody, I mean it's not just a degree of danger, but also like a degree of guaranteed death for the both of us if we didn't watch our steps on the thin ice we were standing on.
Yeah, so that's a pretty fresh perspective, I would say. And we're down to our last question from at Fauzi is the name. 2 questions actually. So why does the wife understand but not forgive her husband? And second question, what was your favorite moment in the entire story?
Okay, I'm gonna say it first. Well, I don't quite remember why, but this is just how I interpreted what happened. Why? I guess since it's understandable that he's a servant, and but it wasn't justified everything he did to me. I think he could be better, but he was so into his job and he abandoned me mentally. If you ask me which, yeah, so that's why I think that's why. But if you ask me which one is my favorite moment during the entire of the story,
Mhm.
it is during my departure from factory 221 or 221, and I was pregnant at the time.
Mhm.
When I felt my baby was moving in my womb, I think it swept away my sadness. Yeah, that was the great time that I've ever had.
Aw. Mr. Husband, how about you?
As much as my sentiments were for my wife, as much as I loved her, in the end, I chose and worked for the state. Between the two, I chose the one that kept us alive physically. But everything else, I'd say time really did burn away most of everything, our emotions, our mental state, leaving like last messages of a relationship. And that's was all it took for us to meet each other again. And I do think that that really took a huge strain on that regard. It was understandable from that regard. And my favorite part of the story, well, I think the part where my death was a climactic point where I think that's the part of story where things kicked off and ended at the same time very highly. My death put the proverbial nail in the coffin, and working with demons that close, that long too, for such a long time. It's a surprise I haven't really stepped past death's door earlier, to be honest. And as if it just, the time just waited for my wife's arrival, waiting for when those little embers of love decide to light up again, just to give me death, just to smother it out one last time, just to bring it all to an end. Just right after the 7 years when nothing has happened far enough for me to die, it chose at that moment at the time to bring me to the ground.
Yeah. And thank you very much to the both of you. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of yet another episode of Book and Tay. Today, we talked about The Human Phonograph by Jonathan Tell. It is a very beautiful story. If you have not read it, go to Commonwealth Writers and read it. And thank you for streaming us once again, wherever you are. Next week, we will have Dr. Jill, a literature lecturer, to share with us about Margaret Atwood's animal poems. So see you next week. Same day, same time. Thank you to the both of you. It has been an honor hearing from the characters of an award-winning short story like this one.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure to be
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yes. Bye.
Bye.